Do chemtrails exist? And if so, what harm are they doing us? Or maybe they don't exist, and if so, what harm is such a belief doing to us? Time to look to the skies here on Things Visible and Invisible. Mick West is an entertainment entrepreneur, but in recent years has become increasingly interested in and skeptical about what are commonly referred to as chemtrails, which led him to create the website contratrailscience.com. He also runs Metabunk.org, a forum for the debunking of many theories from 9/11's conspiracies to the flat earth. He is the author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic and Respect, and he joins me down the line from his home in California. Mick, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Mick, let's start at the beginning with chemtrails, okay? Now, when I was growing up, nobody ever talked about chemtrails. There was just planes in the sky and they had a bit of exhaust and that was sort of it. Where did this whole business of chemtrails and all the thinking around it, conspiracies around it, theories around it, where did it actually begin?
Well, it's interesting. The chemtrail conspiracy theory is actually this theory that goes back to the 1990s, the late 1990s. And it was really the very early days of the internet where it started going. Like online chat forums back then were very, very simple, text-based things. A lot of it was email chains. And people who were into conspiracy theories back before the internet used to communicate via like mailing little flyers to each other in magazines and meeting up in public. So this was like the early days of internet conspiracy theories. And what happened was like somebody once was, I guess, just looking up in the sky and they saw the trails that are being left behind planes. Now, when planes fly through the air, sometimes they essentially create a cloud behind them. And this is kind of an interesting like physical process, and it's a little bit complicated and a little scientific, and a lot of people really don't understand what's going on. But basically what's happening is the lines you see behind planes are actually a type of cloud, and they've actually got a name, cirrus. I think it's like basically human-made cloud. There's a Latin name for it. But someone was looking up in the sky one day and they saw these clouds, and they noticed that sometimes the clouds behind planes, which we call contrails, were spreading out and covering the sky. And they personally hadn't noticed this before, and they thought this was something new. And they started looking into it, and they kind of came up with this weird conspiracy theory that the jet fuel back then was a new type of jet fuel, and it was more toxic, and the government was trying to cover it up. And this is a very old version of the theory, so it actually goes back a long way, back to the 1990s. But kind of fast forward a few years, the theory has morphed over the years through various different versions. And one of the versions is that the government is spraying to try to control the weather and to try to control the climate, and that the trails we see behind planes are actually to do with that. They're trying to actually alter the climate. But if you actually look into the science of it, it's very interesting. You can look in any book on clouds over the last 70 years or so, and you can see that these actually are just a type of cloud. That's why you see them in books on clouds. They're called contrail clouds. And it's something that has been well understood by scientists for a long period of time, but it's not something that people pay attention to. And so something you kind of alluded to earlier, like you didn't really hear about these things before. And something I found is that when people first hear about this conspiracy theory, that is when they start noticing these trails in the sky. So a lot of people actually think that the chemtrails thing just started, say, like 2 or 3 years ago. There's lots of people who think it started in like the 2020s when they had a lot of spare time on their hands. Some people think it started around 2015. Some people think it started around 2006. But really, this is something that's been going on a very, very long time, and it's really just normal clouds being formed behind planes.
Yes, I mean, the way you're talking, Mick, it just sounds so obvious. Of course, it's clouds behind planes. But as you and I both know, a lot of people have decided that that is not the case. You identify the 1990s as the birth date, or roughly the period when this started to become current amongst conversations. I know you've done a lot of research on other conspiracy theories or ideas that are not the norm. Would you say that it came at a time when people... I mean, I'm trying to understand why suddenly chemtrails. Do you know what I mean? I can understand, for example, JFK or 9/11 or various other conspiracies that have come and gone or are still around. But why chemtrails? I mean, of all the things to think about, as I said at the beginning, I never until I heard of this, as you've identified, thought that there was anything suspicious about planes flying across the sky. Was it a kind of an urban legend, or was it a bit of an inside joke in the aviation industry?
Not really, no. I mean, people in the aviation industry didn't really know about it until it kind of became more of a bit of a mainstream popular conspiracy theory. It's not something that people would have even remarked upon, because it's something you'd see every day. When you're a pilot and you're high up in the sky, you see the various different clouds, and pilots all have training in aviation weather. And that's another interesting aspect of it. The contrails form at 30,000 feet. And this isn't something that any of us on the ground really have any experience of, like what is the weather like at 30,000 feet or higher. Now, 30,000 feet is basically the top of Everest. Everest is 29,000 feet plus a bit. And obviously, you look at the top of Everest, it's very, very, very cold. And they go there in the summer when it's the warmest and it's still freezing cold and they still freeze to death. So when you're at 30,000 feet, the air up there is super, super cold. And so what's actually happening there isn't something that people on the ground can really relate to. And this is something that actually leads to the ease at which the conspiracy theory spreads, because you can point to something that's in the sky. You're down on the ground, it's a lovely warm day, it could be in the summer, and you see this cloud forming in the sky, and you think, why is that forming? And then someone tells you the explanation that it's actually ice crystals, and you think, well, that can't be ice crystals, it's a lovely sunny day, so it must be something else, the government must be spraying something. So it's very easy to kind of leverage the lack of understanding that regular people, like you and I, don't have about what's actually going on at 30,000 feet. But, in a more broader sense, contrails are kind of like a very easy conspiracy theory to get into because it relates to something you can see. You can see it every day. You can look up and you can see a plane going across the sky. If you watch it for a while, sometimes the trail will spread out and cover the sky. You can see that happened. And if someone has told you, well, sometimes these trails spread out and cover the sky, you think, aha, that's something that actually happened. I saw it happen myself. And if you don't listen to the meteorologists and the scientists who tell you exactly why that happened, and if you don't look at history and see that it's been happening since the 1920s, essentially, then it's very easy to get sucked into this narrative that it is actually government spraying, when there really is basically zero evidence of that. You can go through all of the claims of evidence that people make about chemtrails, and you can explain them one at a time. And there really is one of the most baseless conspiracy theories, but also one of the easiest conspiracy theories for people to get sucked into.
Well, let's get into that, Mick, because I'm going to play the skeptic in reverse in your instance, because I'm going to say, okay, we know that governments do bad things to people. Of course, they're spraying us all with chemicals for whatever reason they have, some global plan. You've met me on a transatlantic flight, and I'm postulating these ideas. Where would you begin to demolish those sort of very common arguments in popular culture?
Sure. Well, I mean, the argument there is that the government has done bad things in the past, so they must be doing bad things now. But it doesn't tell you what bad things that they are doing. And it doesn't tell you that they're going to be doing exactly the same things that they did in the past. Now, there are some bits of evidence for the chemtrail theory. For example, there's a thing called weather modification. And weather modification is something that actually happens. It's called cloud seeding. They fly small planes over clouds, and they spray silver iodide over them, and it makes them rain a little bit more or snow a little bit more than they would normally have otherwise done. And this is a real thing. A lot of people, when they discover this, they think, aha, there's the real evidence for chemtrails. But the thing about that particular claim of evidence is that when you do cloud seeding, it doesn't actually leave a trail. They burn these flares behind the planes, or they spray stuff out, and it's just basically this invisible powder that comes out, and it makes the clouds rain a bit more. It doesn't leave trails at all. It's done by small planes. So all these bits of these claims of evidence that you try to bolster the theory with, they don't actually hold up. There's another claim that back in, I think, the 50s and 60s, the government was testing how would biological weapons spread. And they sprayed some stuff in the air. I think it was zinc cadmium sulfate, which is a slightly phosphorescent chemical. They sprayed that into the air. They sprayed like a harmless bacteria in the air to see how it would spread. And they would they're trying to figure out if the Russians, this was back in the 50s and 60s, if the Russians attacked us with biological weapons, what would we have to do to try to defend ourselves? How would it spread? Like, where would we need to spend resources? And so they did these spraying experiments. But again, these were spraying experiments that were done, they're kind of a one-off basis. They didn't leave trails in the air, and they were essentially harmless. They used things that they thought at the time that were harmless, because it was back in the 50s when people thought smoking was okay, so it wasn't entirely harmless. But there's nothing that actually ties what the government's done in the past to these trails you see in the sky. And the things the government has done in the past, like these spraying things, really aren't particularly like evil or anything like that. They're just regular science experiments, like one-off science experiments. So if I was to meet someone on a plane and they were to tell me, like, I think the government's spraying because the government's done evil things in the past, I would ask them, where's the actual evidence that they are doing this now? And I would listen to what they think is the actual evidence, and I would try to address that. And usually the first thing that they would say is that normally contrails behind a plane will dissipate in a few seconds. That's the basic claim that a lot of people in the chemtrail community will make. And that's something that's just basically wrong. A contrail is a cloud, and it does exactly the same thing that other clouds do. So if you can see clouds in the sky, clouds don't just magically disappear in 2 seconds. Clouds hang around all day sometimes. Sometimes they spread. Sometimes they disappear. Depends how humid the atmosphere is. So you can just go through each claim of evidence and address it and try to explain. And it's an interesting conspiracy theory because it does have so many well understood claims of evidence that have been explained, and yet so many people still believe it.
But just listening to your explanation there, Mick, there's an element where you have to understand some science, and it's not popular science. The science of clouds or aviation fuel or however that works is not the stuff that most people spend their time researching. Do you think that's part of the problem, that it's a kind of easy thing to get into with the idea that the government's up to something, rather than taking the time to actually research, as you've done, what this phenomena is, how it's caused, and its scientific basis?
Yeah, there's definitely an issue where the science is a bit difficult, and I actually try to stay away from the science as much as possible when trying to talk to people, because most people don't know very much about science, and if they do know, it's often not the relevant science. They'll know something about something that's not related to cloud seeding, or not related to cloud nucleation, which is the technical term for cloud seeding. But you don't actually need science that much. You really more need a little bit of history and just be able to read books. And one of the best tools I found for explaining this to people is to look at all the old books on clouds. I have on my bookshelf here, I've got quite a collection of books on clouds, and I've actually made a video called 70 Years of Books on Clouds, which I actually made 10 years ago. So it's now 80 years of books on clouds. And the last 80 years of books on clouds, you go through each one, and they all have a little section on contrails. And they all have little sections that say contrails sometimes persist and spread out and cover the sky. So you've got this historical record of just regular old cloud books. They're not like science books or anything. They're just books about, here's a cumulus cloud, here's a nimbus cloud, here's a cirrus cloud, and this is what they do. And it's not that complicated. And also just history in general. If you look up at lots of old photos, you will see contrails that persist and spread back in World War II. There's a few before World War II, but that's when it really took off because there was lots of high-altitude plane flights in World War II because they needed to fly the bombers very high. So that's when people really started to notice contrails. And there's lots of photos of, lots of contrails in the sky, crisscross patterns, all the things that people say are actual evidence are things that existed before 1990. And that you can actually find lots of photos of them. And I have lots of collections of photos of them. And they appear in old videos. The movie Spartacus, which I think was filmed in the 50s or 60s, has some contrails in the sky. It was a little continuity error where, Spartacus obviously set in Roman times and they had plain contrails in the sky. They tried their best to remove them, but they ended up with a few in the sky anyway. Lots of other films have contrails in the sky. So there's lots and lots of evidence that what we're seeing isn't anything new. They're just normal contrails, normal clouds.
The problem with you, Mick, is you're confusing me with facts and with science. and you must be aware that there are people who will say Mick West is a control agent. He's propagating a government line. He's got some science, but he's really shielding the nefarious actors in the background who are up to this. I mean, I'm using hyperbole, obviously, but is there an element whereby even if you give me the science, even if you give me the facts, this has become a kind of belief system, part of a belief system, which, given your work, your other work, I mean, how do you actually dislodge something which is not based on something, but something which is a deeply held belief?
Well, it's not going to get dislodged by me just spewing out a whole bunch of facts and telling people things, because obviously, as you say, people are not going to trust me. And I would encourage that. I would encourage people to be skeptical of what people are saying, what people are telling them. And I would extend that to the other people as well. Like just because you think that I'm perhaps in opposition to your ideas, yes, you should obviously distrust me, but also distrust people who you are agreeing with. If someone is telling you something, verify it. Now, when I tell people things, I'm not saying, trust me because I'm an expert. I'm saying, here are these things. My bookshelf right here has all these books on clouds, and I can just actually show them to people. I've actually taken them to places like chemtrail conferences and shown these books to people. And you can show them online, but you can also say, go to your local library. You'll find some of these books. Go to a bookstore. You'll find more modern versions. And I've actually found a lot of these books in secondhand bookstores. Then go online and look at these old movies. Look at these movies that have these contrails in. There's a famous bit of evidence of chemtrails that keeps coming up, which is photos of planes with lots and lots of barrels in. And people say, well, why would these planes have barrels in if they're not spraying? Well, it turns out the barrels are things called ballast barrels, and they're used when they build planes originally. They have to test them for weight and balance, so they use these barrels full of water in the plane to simulate passengers. And people can then go and look this up. They don't have to trust my word on that. They can look at all these references. There are books from the 50s and 60s that have pictures of these barrels. There are videos of the barrels where people talk about the barrels and what they're used for. And there's lots and lots of examples of things that they can actually look up. So it's more kind of, teach a man to fish here. I'm not actually telling you this is how it is. I'm saying, here's the information. Here's where the information is, and you can check this information yourself. You can do your own research, but don't just limit yourself to doing research that confirms things. Do research that actually checks things to see if those things are valid.
Well, unfortunately, Mick, we are going to have to land this plane. Tell people where they can find out more about you and the work you do.
Well, if you're interested in my contrail work, you should go to contrailscience.com, and I have a broader discussion about more chemtrails and conspiracy theories over at metabunked.org, or you can follow me on Twitter at Mick West.
Mick, thank you very much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality. from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.